Hello, my name's Hayley Noakes, and this session is going to be talking to you about project management. So, I'm going to start off just outlining the key elements of project management. I always begin any session about time management or project management on motivation, because it's important to know why it is you're doing something to be able to have the motivation to continue with that project. We're also going to be talking about project objectives. It's important that you have these sorted before you embark on any project. You obviously need to have a schedule of some sort to keep you on track. And you also need to think about the scope of your topic as well, and we'll talk about what that means and how you might go about that. We also want to talk about budget, but in this session I'm not really going to be discussing this. All I really want to say about that is it important that obviously you have a forecast, a budget forecast, and a way to keep track of all your expenditure. But if you have a large budget to handle, likely it is you will have a finance officer that can help you do that. But for the purposes of sort of student projects and project management, it's unlikely that you'll have a budget to manage. So, being motivated is a useful way of making goals more powerful is to use this SMART mnemonic here. SMART stands for being specific or significant. So you must make your goals specific. If you say something that's too fluffy or is too generalized, it then becomes a big task that you can't start with, you can't get your head around. So the example here we've got sail around the world is a goal. It's more powerful to say to completed my round the world trip by December the 31st 2015, because you've got a date in mind that you're going to finish it by. It might also be useful to say how it is you're going to get around the world in that trip there as well. And the first one says to sail around the world. Well, maybe you won't sail around the world, perhaps you'll get a train or drive or do different things. So it's useful to sort of make it specific to what you actually want to do. It also needs to be measurable as well. If you can't measure how far you are to obtaining that goal, then it can be very hard then to stay motivated and continue with it. You must make sure that you break it down so that then you can see your progress, and that's motivation in itself. It must also be attainable as well. If it isn't attainable and you set yourself goals that are too hard, too high, too wide, too, as we said before, too unspecific, then it becomes then again difficult to carry on with them, because you're setting your barrier too high. If you can never reach it, if it's never in sight, finishing your goal, then it can be difficult to be motivated to continue with it. You might have a large goal that you think that's so far away, I'm not going to obtain that anytime soon, but then you need to sort of work out lots of smaller goals that will help you achieve that. So I want to become a millionaire by the time I'm 30, then that's too big a goal in itself to just simply achieve. But you might then set goals of, well, I'm going to make sure I finish my degree, I'm going to make sure that I get some work experience, and all of those things then chip away at those larger goals that you might want to go for. It has to be relevant to you or rewarding as well. If it isn't something that you feel that you want to do that is relevant to you, it's always going to be difficult to be able to motivate yourself to continue with something. And we often find that in everyday life we have to do things that we don't find particularly interesting or we don't find particularly rewarding. But it's important to make sure that you've always got your bigger goals in mind and know how those small tasks contribute to you achieving your larger goal, like obtaining your degree. You might not like a particular module, might not like doing presentations, but all of those things, if you are motivated to do them, then you will achieve your bigger goal. So you must make sure that you know why it is you're doing something. And it also needs to be trackable or time bound. So it's no good saying I'm going to have a goal of I'm going to learn a language. I need to say when I'm going to be able to do that, and I need to be able to track my process. So you might have a schedule, you might have dates in mind, you might have interim deadlines that you want to get to before you get to finishing the final goal, because again it's the same as it being measurable. If you can't track your time, then it's very difficult for you then to be motivated to continue it. This is why it's sometimes difficult when students come to the end of their first year, beginning of their second year, because they've come quite far into their degree, so the sort of novelty of being a student in the first year has worn off, and they're ready to sort of get started with the serious work. But it's a long way before you finish, and sometimes it can seem then that you're never going to achieve this goal, so breaking it down and making it time-bound or trackable is quite important. So if you're setting goals and objectives, you should try and make sure you state each goal as a positive statement rather than negative statements or things that you shouldn't be doing or mistakes that you don't want to make. You should be precise with them as well, as we said, by putting in specific dates and times and amounts so that you can track and measure your achievements. And that way you can have tick boxes. It's very satisfying having a to-do list and ticking off all those things that you're doing and knowing how you're getting closer to achieving your larger goals. Setting priorities is important as well. It's quite common to have lots of goals on the go at one go, and that's perfectly normal. We have all different needs and wants in life, but you need to make sure that you prioritise these and also realise that you can't do everything all in one go. So give each a priority. Which one of these, what are the consequences of not doing this thing by this date? So as a student right now, one of your priorities is always going to be completing your degree work. If you don't do that, you won't get another chance again, say 10 years down the line, to do the same thing, whereas you might get another chance to go on that trip to France or to learn that language or whatever else it is that isn't to do with your degree. So it's good to have lots of things going on, but you must remember to be able to prioritise them. Your time is limited. Write your goals down as well, because this crystallises them, gives them more force, especially if you're working in a group with other people. You should all be working towards the same goal when you're working together on a project, and let's make sure that everyone's on the same page as to what it is you want to achieve. Keep operational goals small as well. So these are the things that all add up, and so you can chip away slowly at achieving that larger goal. You're not going to wake up one day and suddenly have learnt a new language. You're not going to wake up one day and suddenly have achieved your degree. All those little goals that help you add up to that main goal are really important, and you have to keep them small. You can always break down sub-goals into further sub-goals and further sub-goals to make sure that what you end up then is an action plan, and we'll talk a bit about that later. You should set realistic goals as well, as I've said already, though, that they need to be things that that you've set for yourself, that you want to do, that are relevant to you, and that you know that you can actually achieve at some point. It might take hard work, it might take a long time, but you know that you're going to do them in the end. It's easy, I think, for your employer, your parents particularly, friends, or just in general society, to set these unrealistic goals for us, like I'm going to be a size 0. They're unnecessary, unrealistic goals that are set by other people, so you need to prioritise those things and think, well, okay, right now actually I might work towards being a different size, and that is a goal. Maybe when I reach that goal I might set myself another goal of being even smaller, or whatever it is I want to do, but they need to be realistic in the first place. So I just want you to take a moment just to think about a particular project that you might be working on at the moment, whether you're a student working on a SADRAS project, or whether you've got a group project that you're doing with your colleagues, or perhaps maybe you've got a project that you're doing to do with one of your societies. Think about what the objectives are. What is it that project is trying to achieve? What is the point of it? And how do those objectives, those goals, that we can call them as well, how do they fit in with all of your other objectives or goals over the next year? And think of a timeline that you might be able to put down just roughly on paper to say, well, okay, I need this amount of time to do this project, and these are the objectives. How does it fit in with the rest of your life? And it will help you then see, often we don't realise how many objectives and things that we have that we want to do, that we want to achieve, and this is how you can sort of help yourself with your time management. So, we need to define the scope of a project. Any project needs to have a scope, because otherwise then we don't know where it begins and where it ends. So, scope essentially is the work that must be done in order to deliver a product. So whenever we do any kind of project management, we are delivering a product. The product doesn't necessarily mean it's, in business terms, the product is a new perfume or a new type of food or something. It could be a paper for a conference or for a journal. It could be a poster that we're creating to take to a conference or to present in class, a presentation. It might be an essay, it might be a job application. So the product is something that you are trying to, that is your objective essentially. The product could also be simply, well, you're producing a report of findings from a piece of research that you're doing. And that product has specified features and functions. And the features and functions are set by, however, the features and functions of that product, so the paper, the poster, the essay, whatever it is you're trying to do, have a set of requirements. And those requirements are often set by the resources that you have available to you, a client that you might be working with, the amount of time that you have, a funding body, so if you're applying for a funding bid, the requirements of your field as well. So if you're doing a research project, then the requirements might be that you must have a particular sample size, you must use a particular methodology for it to be accepted in that field. Your marking criteria could be included in this section as well. So when thinking about the scope, if you can't remember anything else about it, you really need to just list your deliverables. So your deliverables are the things that you are going to produce. Okay, so my objective might be to find out why students don't engage with extracurricular activities. My deliverables from that are going to be a presentation that I need to give to my managers. So if I know that that's what I've got to do, then at the bare minimum, within my scope, I need to know what do I need to do to be able to deliver that presentation. So in this section of your research paper, it's the part where you list essentially what you're doing. So it's outline everything you're going to do as part of your research paper. So the example we've got here is, in this study I have gathered some statistics about high school students and their education who are enrolled in both private and public high schools. Okay, so we're saying that's what they've done. So I've got some data about high school students. I'm not interested in their parents or their teachers. There'll be, what I could do there if I wanted to develop the scope even further is say specifically, well, what schools am I focusing on? Am I doing all the schools in the country, or am I just doing a few? So this is where you think about your limitations. Any research paper that you ever read will state within it its limitations, and this doesn't refer to how rubbish my project is, the negative aspects of it, but you have to define the limitations of a project. The limitations will be largely dictated by the time and the money that you have to do it, or the expertise, or any other resources that you have. The limitations of any project in business, so I've got a project where I'm going to be building a theme park. I will have limitations to that budget. I can only do a theme park that has 20 rides because 30 rides is out of scope. I can't afford that. We don't have time to do it. My theme park is only going to be aimed at children because in my scope I haven't got the resources to develop rides for adult as well, so they are outside of my scope. So you need to try and imagine some of the questions that people might ask you about their project. So why didn't you deal with these people? Why didn't you deal with this country? Why didn't you collect this data? You have to anticipate those questions. And it's okay that you didn't do those things. You can't do everything in your research project. You can't do everything in any kind of project you're going to be in. You have to limit it. But you need to say to them, well, that's why I did this. These are out of bounds. I haven't studied them. It might make an interesting project next time. I might be running for social secretary at the university. My project is to market myself. I'm creating posters and I'm doing talks, but I haven't created a website because I don't have the time and the resources to do it. It might be a good idea for next time, and if I can get some more resources then I will do, but for now it's not within my remit. So another example here for bounds is I did not, however, study students that are in alternative education establishments and those who are in juvenile detention facilities. So if we go back to the question before, they're studying statistics about high school students and their education, but they didn't study these certain groups of students because they were out of scope for that study. So you just need to make sure that when you're thinking about your project, any project that you're doing, you are limiting it. And it's very easy. Students always overestimate what they can do in the time that they've got. So this is why it's very important to really think about, what do I actually have to do to achieve that goal or that objective there? Is it realistic that I'm going to be able to get a survey and all the students at Kingston University to find something out. Even if I took a sample of them, that could end up being hundreds or thousands of responses that I need. Am I going to be able to do that for a 3-month project? If I'm doing a PhD, then my scope in my project would be larger than if I'm doing an undergraduate dissertation, because you have more time and more resources. So, moving on to planning and scheduling. Really, planning and scheduling is just essentially predicting, estimating and educated guessing. You're not going to be absolutely positive how long it's going to take to do absolutely everything, but you can predict, you can estimate, you can guess, okay, roughly how long, if I've got to interview, say, 10 people at half an hour, how long roughly is that going to take, bearing in mind that I've got other things to do, it might be hard to get participants, that kind of thing. It needs to be renewed continually as well. If you set a project budget, a project timeline for a year, it's okay to then review that as you go along and change things, because things crop up, things are unexpected. As long as you're looking at it regularly to refine it, that then means that then perhaps maybe as you go through the project you'll decide actually it's not realistic to do this part of the project because I don't have enough time now, because this bit has taken me a lot longer than I thought I was going to. So responding to the changing risks and progression. And your schedule really is your basis for monitoring your progress and control of a project. So any good project manager should have a good idea of the overall project schedule, but also of the individuals that are working on their project and where they fit within that and how they are progressing. And it helps you to plan out and allocate resources. And when we say resources, we don't mean necessarily pens and paper. Resources are people. Resources are time. And you should plan how unexpected delays will affect the project. So really think about, well, what will happen if there is sudden illness? What will happen if I get no response to my survey? What will happen if I lose all my data all of a sudden? It's not necessarily that we want to be all doom and gloom and assume that the worst is going to happen, but if you are prepared that some of these things do happen, and any project manager will tell you that there is always something that crops up that you didn't expect, that puts you behind schedule, that does something that makes you think, oh no, what's going to happen now? So the inputs needed for a project schedule are your personal and project calendars, okay? So everyone who's working on your team, if you're working with other people or just you on your own, your personal calendar needs to be in there as well, because you need to work out, well, where am I going to fit in my personal time? Where am I going to fit in my lectures? Where am I going to fit in my working time, my time with my family? There's no point in doing a schedule and ignoring all of that and expecting yourself to be some kind of automatron working continuously on this project throughout the year or months or however long you've got. You need the description of the scope of the project as well, because then you can determine sort of key dates throughout, start dates and end dates, major assumptions behind your plan, and also think about your stakeholder expectations as well. So who's interested in your project? Who's going to want to see this report or whatever it is you're going to be, your product that you're going to be producing at the end? What are their expectations? Thinking about your project risks as well. As I said, we need to identify what the risks might be. And also list your activities and resources. So what resources do you have? So what time, what people do you actually have? And what activities are there do you need to do to achieve whatever project or goal it is that you need to achieve? You really need to think about all of that before you start a timeline. So this is just some example of some project stages. This by no means is everything that you would need to go through when you're running a project. This is based on something, a research project here. So you might think about reviewing the literature, your ethical approval, your method design, writing up, collecting data, analysing the data. Do you have to do pilot studies? There are administrative tasks such as filing or collecting consent forms and that kind of thing. These are just some examples of the stages of a project that you might actually go through. Each one of these isn't necessarily an activity in itself. Getting ethical approval, there'll be a whole load of activities that you have to do in order to be able to achieve that objective, that aim of ethical approval. So we can try and figure out a timeline and a more intricate detail level by looking at long, medium term and short term plans. You should always start big and work your way down when you're doing plans, and plan for unexpected delays, thinking about your overall project and aims. The long term and medium term plans will change, as we said already. It's an ongoing process, but it helps you keep you on track where you can see an overall picture of the timing of your projects, when are your deadlines. But making sure that you do plan in free time. So a long-term plan, most of you, unless you're doing any PhD research, won't be doing sort of years and years worth of projects, but you may do a year-long project if you're working on a SADRAS project or you're doing a dissertation. So you really, when you're thinking about a long-term plan, you're filling in sort of your deadlines, your busy periods, thinking about filling downtime with routine activities. So you're always being productive, but you're not necessarily always working to the height of your capacity. So work backwards from your deadlines, thinking about these questions of when do you need to stop reviewing the literature. So any project that you're running, when do you need to stop researching and finding out what do the customers want, what are the needs of this project, what is already out there. When do you need to stop that research that's forming the basis of your product? When should you stop collecting data as well? So when should we actually finish collecting data and start analysing it? And that will largely be dependent on whatever subject areas you're coming from. When should you have completed a first draft or a prototype of your project or a draft of that presentation? So thinking about those questions is really important. But most of you will be focusing on something more like a medium-term plan where you're thinking in months and weeks. So within a medium-term plan, then you're also putting in your deadlines. You should also be regularly scheduling meetings with your supervisor or group or staff or whoever it is you're working with. But in your medium-term plan, you're really planning the stages of data collection. You might be breaking down your write-up. You might be writing down what your data analysis is going to be, when you're going to do that. But your medium-term tasks, those that you don't know in detail in 6 months in advance. So I know I need to do a literature review, but I don't know necessarily now exactly what articles I'm going to be reading and how I'm going to go about that. But I know I need to plan in, say, 8 weeks to do a literature review. So I've got a long-term plan. During that 8 weeks when I've got my literature review going on, it's not really worth me trying to plan in doing 1,000,001 other things because I have to spend my time focusing on my literature review. So each of these tasks may take weeks or even months to complete. So this is an example of a medium-term plan here. So this person's got 3 topics that they're working on. They've gone from week 4 to week 10, so they're starting sort of for some of these ones in 1 week, then they're going to read for the presentation. So we don't know exactly what we're going to read yet, but we know we need to do some reading. We're going to be writing drafts of our assignments. I'm not going to break down necessarily exactly like, oh, I'm going to write 500 words of this particular topic area, but I know I need to start writing my draft. So it's in a longer term, so you probably should, if you're doing a project that's lasting anything longer than a few months, you really should be thinking about doing a medium-term plan to work out what stages do I need to go through to get this project finished, and when then, if I'm realistically going to have my draft done by this date, when should I be finishing reviewing the literature, when should I be finishing doing the research, when should I be finishing collecting data. So this is why we work backwards from the deadlines. So just as an activity now, you might want to think about all of the activities you need to do to complete a particular project that you're working on right now. So all the stages that you need to go through, and write down on post-it notes, I think is a good idea, all of those stages. So stages like review the literature, as I said, collect the data, get ethical approval, all the things that you might need to do for your particular project. Organise those into sections as well, so which ones are to do with writing up, which ones are to do with the research, which ones are to do with collecting data, or that kind of thing. And then you might then work backwards to create your medium-term plan from all of those. And I like to put things on post-it notes because it enables you to sort of put them up on a big chart on your wall, move them around, take them off, put them up again where you feel that they should go. Once you've got a medium-term plan though, that really is a project plan that you've got there in front of you, but it isn't an action plan, and a medium-term plan won't help you get started with your project or get started on activities each day. So you really need to do about thinking about daily and weekly plans. Each week, at the beginning of each week, having a weekly plan where you're detailing intricately in 30-minute to 2-hour slots roughly what you're actually going to be doing to get that task, that stage, to its completion. So it's full of lots of to-do lists. You need to make it measurable. There's no point in saying, I'm going to do some literature review. You need to say, what article are you going to be reading, taking notes, and how long you're going to be doing that for. It's no good going to the library and saying, I'm going to read for 3 hours. How do I know at the end of that day whether reading 1 article in those 3 hours was what I wanted to achieve versus reading 10 articles in those 3 hours is what I wanted to achieve? It's very easy to lose track of what you're doing. It's the same with writing I'm going to write my essay this afternoon. How many words are you going to be writing, and what section are you going to be writing? So be specific and measurable about it. But in your short-term plan, you should also detail ongoing tasks as well. So when are your lectures, when are you doing other reading for different seminars, when are you going out with your friends, and that kind of thing. But these are all the smaller tasks that make up the large tasks. So this is where sometimes you can lose the point of what it is you're doing and why it is you're doing it. So it's important to make sure that you still have those bigger goals written down somewhere, so you know that when you're in the library reading that journal article, this has a point. This is going to get me a good grade on this essay, which is going to get me a good degree, which is going to get me into that graduate job I wanted. This is going to give me enough money to buy that house that I want, and the car and the holidays I want to go on, or have that job where I'm really dying to get involved in those activities. So spend time modifying your plans, as I said at the beginning of the week, but also bribe yourself as well. You need to give yourself incentive to do it. It's actually more powerful than you think to actually bribe yourself, even if it is just having a big list of tick boxes and knowing that, yes, I've achieved what I needed to achieve. Make sure you write it down, because as we said before, it crystallises it. And do give yourself rewards. Okay, I'm going to go for that nice dinner, or I'm going to go to that party, or buy that new dress that I liked, or go and spend some time with my pub down with my friends. Whatever it is that you want to do as a reward for it, and you will feel happier about being there, and that you deserved it if you go. If you go anyway and you haven't done your work, then it won't feel as good. So you do need to stick to it. But it's really important to give yourself that incentive, because it is hard sometimes, even with the bigger goals in mind, not to feel like I really need to reward myself for reading this article that was really rather dry. So here's an example of a short-term plan here. So it's just a weekly plan. We've got it in 2-hour slots. We've got our lectures in there, and in here what is missing is that they need to be more specific. We've got work in the library and things like independent study. That's not enough. Each day I will be going through this and saying, well, okay, I'm going to work in the library between 11 and 12. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to summarise some of the articles I read last week onto cue card form. So I'm going to do 3 of those. When I'm doing my independent study, I'm going to spend 2 hours writing roughly 500 words of my assignment, and I'm going to get that done. So you need to be specific with it so you know where you're at. And as well, it makes it much easier when you get up and you go to the library to get on with your work, to just get started. It's very easy to procrastinate and avoid doing that work when you're not sure exactly what it is that you're supposed to be doing. So what you should do now with one of your activities that you wrote down previously on the post-it, or think about one, is like doing a literature review, or collecting data, or getting ethical approval. One of those stages, break it down then into particular chunks, little tasks that you need to do to achieve that. So if I'm going to do a literature review, I'm not just going to go to the library and do a literature review. I'm going to have to spend at least an hour on the computer with Google Scholar researching 10 articles. I'm then going to go and skim read those articles, and then I'm going to pick 5 of them and I'm going to read them more in depth, and I'm going to spend another couple of hours taking notes of those. Then I might condense those notes into cue card form and make a mind map out of them. Well, there's lots of little tasks that add up to achieving that literature review. And there are lots of other videos on here as well that will help you with, okay, what tasks do I actually need to do a successful literature review? That should help you with your short-term planning. Just a few tips on keeping organised. It's important to always take notes on the things that you're reading and the meetings you're going to. Take minutes when you go and have meetings with your supervisor, when you have meetings with your working group. Always take notes of these things as a record of what's been said, what's gone on, so that everybody knows where you're at, where the project is at. Condense those notes as well if you're taking notes for an assignment into cue card form, so then you've got like an easy to access record. You might create an electronic database of these as well on something like EndNote, or you could just use an Excel file where you can take notes and minutes from meetings, email them round to everybody else. You can take it in turns to do that kind of thing. But if you're doing short-term planning, you may need to make sure that you're keeping like a diary of your weekly and daily tasks. And as a group, it's important to keep an eye on making sure that you're keeping to your deadlines, your timeline. It's easy to stray off this when you're working in a group. Remembering as well that other people take a long time to respond to requests and emails. So when you're working with external companies, when you're working with academics or other people in a group, that they're not always necessarily going to read that draft in that amount of time. They're not going to necessarily respond to you by the time you want them to. So you have to be organised enough to get your emails and your requests out there early enough so that if someone does delay, it's not going to completely throw off your project. Back up your data. It's an obvious one that I'm sure everyone tells you all the time, but you do need to think carefully about where you're keeping your project plans. Are they all on paper? Are they all electric? Keep them stored in different places when you're backing them up as well. I've had people that have had their laptop stolen with all their data on it, and they tell me that they did back it up onto a memory stick, but the memory stick was in the laptop bag. So that doesn't really then help out very much. Use checklists and rewards, and also use something called Linoit. There's a good website called linoit.com. It essentially is an online post-it note pinboard site, which means you can do essentially the same thing as we've been doing with the post-it notes, but you're taking it around with you electronically, which can be useful. Gantt charts are what Microsoft Office Project will create for you. I would recommend doing that right at the beginning of your project when you have an idea of your stages and the timeline, so that then what it does is create a rather useful visual tool of your busy times and your down times, because you just type in what your stage of project is, so collecting data, type in the dates and how long you're going to be doing it for, and it creates a colourful diagram for you. And that way then it helps you then plan in your other goals, your other time commitments, and see, well, when is it realistic when I've got 5 other things on the go to take up running for social secretary or whatever it is that you want to do. It helps you plan your time in that way. I don't think I'd use Microsoft Project for the entire project and run, because it's got bells and whistles, you can do all sorts of things on there, but I'd recommend, if you just want to have a look at a visual overview of your whole project, that it can be quite useful for that. Just briefly about working with your staff partners. If you're doing a SADRAS project, if you're working on a dissertation, if you're doing a PhD, you need to work with other staff at the university. If you're doing any kind of project management, you need to be working with a group. Rarely do you ever manage a project solely on your own where there are no stakeholders or anyone else interested. So you must make sure that you prepare carefully for meetings, so you come to them with questions and insights about what it is you're doing. You are leading these, so you have to make sure that you're prepared for them. Keep records of those meetings and issues discussed, as we've mentioned already. And take with you as well your timeline, so that you can show progress, so that you can show them that you are doing something, you are working towards things, and that will be valued by whoever it is you're working for. Ask opinions as well, so you might suggest something or say something. Ask individuals in your group, even the quieter ones that don't feel like they want to necessarily contribute, what do they think of this? And make sure as well that you speak up and give your opinion. When we ran this project management session live a few days ago, one of the main things that students said was, when working in a group with other people, I wish I'd had the confidence to speak up and say, no, I don't agree with that, we should be doing it this way. And they're hard lessons to learn, because at the end of the project it's too late. Make sure you say that you're unsure, or when you do not understand something. It's quite easy to be intimidated when you're working with others, to think, oh, everyone else seems to know what they're talking about. Tell them that you're unsure, could you repeat that, I don't understand. Because otherwise you'll walk out of the room and they'll assume that everything's okay, and actually you don't know what they're doing, you don't know what they're talking about, and it's harder to go back afterwards and admit you don't know what you're talking about than just say right there and then. Allow plenty of time for reading drafts is an obvious one, but also planning interim deadlines as well. And you should plan in interim deadlines with your whole group, or with your stakeholders or your member of staff that you're working with, because that gives them extra some extra oomph in terms of, well, other people are expecting you to have done these things by these deadlines. If it's only you and you don't tell anybody about the deadlines, well, often it seems like there are no consequences of not achieving that deadline. But it's a good idea when you're feeling like procrastinating to really write down, well, what are the consequences of not meeting this deadline? And you'll be surprised actually how you often are persuaded into getting on with it when you do that. If you can, have a look at some of the example I've given here is past posters. So the SADRAS partners, you have to create an academic poster as part of your project. Have a look at some of them so you can see, well, what is everyone else doing? any kind of other application form you might be doing, have a look at the application and the CVs of other people that are applying for jobs in those areas. If you're trying to create a product or a website or something, have a look at some of them. That's your market research that you're doing, just the same as for an essay you'll be doing a literature review. Make sure you keep in contact as well. Never leave a meeting with your group or with your staff partners or your tutors without arranging the next meeting. You'll leave assuming that I will email, arrange another meeting. Weeks go by, you forget to do it, you email them, they take another few weeks to reply to you, and then suddenly 3 months down the line you haven't had another meeting. So put it in the diary each time. You'll find it. I mean, I'm sure you've all got friends that sort of you live away from a long distance, that the ones that you keep in touch with are the ones that you do that kind of thing with. So make sure you have the next meeting arranged before you leave. So regular meetings are important. Make sure everyone is sure of their tasks and the overall project plan. You'll be surprised how many times that often in a group you'll find people that are they have different ideas of what the objective is or where it should be going, and you're not voicing that to one another. Asking, is everyone happy, is really important. If people are unhappy and unsatisfied with their roles within a project when you're managing it, they won't give you 100%. Okay, and also explaining that there will be things that people don't want to do in a project, but making sure that there are things they also do want to do as well. Making sure that you're keeping up to date with each other's progress as well. And as project manager, it will be your responsibility to keep up to date with this and keep these things going. You shouldn't ignore team members that have gone off the radar, who haven't responded to your emails. It means likelihood is that they're not doing anything, they're unsure, they're unhappy, and that can hold up the entire project when just one or two people aren't pulling their weight. It's useful these days as well to use online tools like Skype, Google Drive, which is like a collaborative Dropbox sort of tool, or blogs to keep track of your project and what's going on and keep in communication with each other, because meeting up face to face when people live in different places, have different timetables, can be often quite difficult. So use a group Skype meeting, upload a document to Google Drive and ask for comments on it on there, rather than sending around a PowerPoint presentation to everybody, and that can sometimes make it easier for you. There are videos on the academic mentoring program site here on how to use Skype and Google Drive if you're not sure about how to use those. And lastly, to end this presentation, I just want to share with you some of the mistakes that were told to us the other day when we did this meeting, this project session live, because you can't share these with your group there, but have a think about it yourself. Some of the mistakes that you've made when managing a project or working in a group. As I said earlier, by far the number one was sort of speaking up when they knew something was wrong, that they thought the project was going in the wrong direction, and in the end they ended up being right, but it was too late by then. Another one was when different members of the group have a different idea about what the project outcome should be. So they went to a conference to give a presentation on their project, and one person did the presentation but presented a different argument that the rest of the team would have done, because they hadn't made it clear about what their whole overall argument as a group should be. So that was a difficult one, making sure that everybody knows what the aims are and what the outcomes should be. Also, students that don't speak up about non-participating members as well of a group. The students aren't pulling their weight within group work. It gets to about a week before, they still haven't done what they're supposed to have done, and you're all going to be graded on a presentation in a few days. It's about not having the confidence or to say to those students, or to report it to a tutor, so somebody who can step in early on so that you can get stuff sorted early on. So those are just some of the mistakes that our students in our sessions said that they had come across and they'd experienced, and I'm sure you've got some yourself. Learning from those mistakes is really quite important. It's not a terrible thing when they happen, but it is a terrible thing when they happen over and over and over again. Project management and working in groups really is about being assertive, but also making sure that you listen to your team and that everybody is happy. Having a good schedule that you're happy to modify, but also action plans which allow you to implement those day-to-day tasks, which sometimes it can be easy to procrastinate.